For franchisors, the goal, it's not just selling franchises. It's about building a scalable franchise system. And no matter how tempting it is to focus on sales, focus on new franchisees, it's critical to have retention, training. And today, we're going to speak with Doug Mark, president of Learning Zen. We're going to discuss best practices for learning management systems, training systems, and building a private equity-worthy, exitable franchise system. Doug, I've been looking forward to the conversation, and it's not only do I reflect on my own business as we grow, but I see emerging franchisors, I see the growth cycles, I see the struggles. We all go through it, and time and again, it always points back to training and systems and building a durable and scalable business model. And I've always appreciated what Learning Zen does, and today it's all about best practices for everyone who's watching and listening. New franchisors, emerging franchisors, the goal today is to give them best practices and strategy on how we're going to go about doing this.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Charles. I'm excited to talk to you and be on the other side of the podcast and actually get to talk a little bit about what we do and how we support, franchisors in return really are supporting the franchisees. We're kind of lobbying on their behalf a lot of times for the franchisors to, build an electronic system that's going to make sure that they're supporting those franchisees. So they're getting to that sort of profitability at the unit level.
So Doug, let's take, so Learning Zen, it's a franchise specific learning management system. You work with many franchisors. And so as we go through this conversation and we're deciphering keys here, the reflecting on your experiences with brands, startups, scalable brands, right? If you could frame the issue, and maybe it comes in growth cycles or segments, what's the issue most franchisors are facing where an LMS and training platform's the solution, and maybe why they don't see it yet? Like, how do you see this in the day-to-day action?
Perfect question, because I think every brand struggles with this at some point in their life cycle. And I think really it comes back to something that's kind of obvious in our space, which is, consistency is king in franchising, right? And people buy into franchises because they want to follow this system, right? They're entrepreneurial, maybe not all entrepreneurs, but they're very entrepreneurial, and they want to kind of have this blueprint that they can follow and make sure that they're going to be successful, because half the time they've invested their life savings in this. And so it's scary, right? It's a little terrifying to think about, I'm going to get into this and I'm going to be by myself. You're not by yourself, right? You've got the support of the franchisor, but the franchisor wants to make sure at the end of the day that you're following their system. And I think when you take a look at your actual business practices and find out where you're following down, almost every single time that leads to a teachable, trainable moment. And that's where, somebody like Learning Zen comes in, is we're going to actually, give you good best practices about how to get that information where you might be struggling at a unit level, and creating sort of engaging short course that can be absorbed quickly, but really get you that sort of ROI that you're looking for.
And for our conversation, and and we'll a little later on, I'm going to go over a screen you showed me, but when you're focused on learning management systems, are there multiple layers? Are you focused on layer one being training for franchisees, one training from franchisor to franchisee, and then two being training of employees of the franchise business?
Yeah, this is absolutely my favorite, topic here, because I think those are the two factors right there. You identified both of them. When it comes to creating a good sort of learning and development infrastructure at your organization, you really have to think about, okay, I need to train owners on how to run and operate this business. And I think that that's just one half of the equation, right? The owners absolutely need the training, right? They have different challenges than our operational staff, right? They have to understand how to read a P&L and what are those sort of identifiers in the P&L that are going to cause them to say, hey, we've got to make a change here. Inventory is not matching up, or sales are down this month. And so I think there's a set of training for owners that needs to be thought out and delivered in short bite-sized chunks that aren't overwhelming, as these franchisors are, growing their brand and getting into the franchising space. There's a litany of different things being thrown at them. And I think they got to figure out, how do I get my system and support all of my franchisees by delivering that system where if they forget any part of that, I've got easy access to it, right? I can flip up my laptop or I can flip up my phone and revisit, something that might be relevant to the owners. And the other half of it is the operational training for the hourly staff. And I think there's this general fear in franchising, right? Because of joint employer concerns that have been sort of nagging at us for the last couple of decades here. But I think the challenge is that, the fear is, hey, I can't build any training that my franchisee is going to use to train their staff. And that's not the case. When we're talking about, joint employer concerns, really, you can't have the franchisor training the hourly staff, but you absolutely can, create assets, training videos, training programs that the franchisee can then manage and assign to their own staff. And I think that's what's sort of one of the critical things with Learning Zen being a franchise learning management system, is that we understand the infrastructure that encompasses franchising. We know that there's a franchisor, there's a franchisee, and there's hourly employees. If we can talk to the franchisors and get them to invest in training for the franchisees and creating the courses that in turn the franchisees can use to train their staff, we've got a really healthy, holistic system at that point.
Doug, let's go through life cycle a little, from startup through emerging and private equity backed franchises, right? And along the way, best practices, things to be aware of. And so if we're starting at the beginning of the cycle, right? I mean, we have some amazing emerging franchisor clients that we work with, where they've been successful, right? They've gained good traction, 40, 50, 60 units. And what I find is many times these founders have gone above and beyond and succeeded almost with one hand tied behind their back, whether it's not having the right legal platform or the best platform for their business, whether it's technology support, territory mapping, or, in this case, learning management systems. But at the very start, or for the new franchisors out there, what do you typically see them struggle with when they're onboarding their franchisees?
Yeah. So with new brands, it's that they don't have, the materials to support it. When we're talking about the emerging brands, their team isn't established yet, in the sense of, they don't have anybody on their staff who's probably a learning and development expert. They oftentimes, don't have anybody who might be a training expert, but they've got a ton of subject matter expertise. And I think they, when they are early on, they really struggle with, how do I get this subject matter expertise that is up in my head dispersed to my community? I think that's the thing that the emerging brands are struggling with. And it's a problem we all deal with, right? We have time and money is sort of like the two things that always come up. And if I don't have time, then I try to throw money at a problem. And if I don't have money, then I'm going to throw my time at a problem. And when we're a younger brand, we don't have money. We've spent that, getting to the point where we are franchising and we are growing. And so they're left with time, since they don't have the money. And I will say that time is the biggest challenge with getting, good content created for your organization. And, when we look at great franchise brands and brands that are growing up to the point where they are, private equity is interested in learning more about them and possibly, acquiring that brand. I think in the early stages of that, the actual development of the training material typically comes from the ownership team themselves. And it's something that probably, historically speaking, this was a really big lift. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this is a massive lift. It used to take hundreds of hours to build e-learning courses. But I think because of the advances in technology and leveraging some AI tools to help you, build scripts and outlines and we've really shortened the amount of time it takes to actually create the materials. And so if we can get a chance to kind of work with owners of emerging brands early on, we can teach them what are the different software pieces that you may need to use. What are the learners sort of expecting at the end of the day as well? If you're a franchisor and you're my age, you're in your 50s, you learned very differently than your staff of 16 to 25-year-olds that you're hiring and bringing on. And I think what happens problematically is that we just inherently, I'm 52 years old, Charles, I'm going to design a course that I want to take, and I've forgotten about what my learners want to actually absorb on their end. And if I'm dealing with a 16 to 25-year-old age range, they don't want to come in and they're not going to read an operations manual. You can show it to them, but they're not going to read that. They're probably not going to read much of anything. You need to deliver training in a way that they want to absorb it. So we're going to teach you how to create short, engaging training videos, because they can be retained so much faster than the written word, right? When we look at something like, video-based training, video training is kind of unique because it's, how do I explain this? Like in a sort of a like straightforward way, I would say that video training is being absorbed not sequentially, right? When you're reading text, you're reading things sequentially. When you're absorbing video, you've got sound, you've got motion, you've got sight, you've got some text that might come up on the screen as well. So you're hitting all of these additional learning styles. And so if we can work with a smaller brand, we're going to work with them and find, you're the leader. Let's get you into this material. You're trying to systemize your franchise brand. And if you want all of your franchisees to deliver on the same system, why don't you deliver that message out to them? Or why doesn't somebody on your team that they see on a regular basis create that material and deliver that out to them? And what we find is it really reduces in the amount of time it takes to get an employee onboarded. It reduces the amount of waste and questions. And the employees feel this sense of value because you've invested in training. They now know how to do their job, how it's being measured, and they're much more likely to stay with you for a longer period of time if that's the case. And so I feel like we started with one question, Charles, and then I turned
No.
different answers.
No, so Doug, when we're speaking with clients and one thing I think one thing we always talk about is no matter how good your operations manual is when you start, that it's always an evolution and work in progress. And that for the emerging brands as you onboard your pioneering franchisees or those initial, you're going to find the need to develop other playbooks and other tools. You're going to see frustrations and pain points. And I even, my own business, right? Today we're having a conversation about our own LMS system and, why we're not implementing it the right way. So I think number one is, right, having that system in place and the confidence. But to your point, it's going to come from the original owners, the original leadership team. And if you just take it slowly and keep adding along the way, I think it becomes a powerful tool.
Yeah. And this goes back to something that I've heard other people, talk about in the past when they, if I was to ask you, what brand out there do you think does a great job training? What massive brand out there does a great job training? And I will say that 9 out of 10 times someone says Chick-fil-A, right? Like they associate Chick-fil-A with this, training. And I think there's another brand that does it really well. I think Jersey Mike's does a good job with the training that they're doing as well. But I think it comes down to the mindset of the brand itself. And I question this openly in front of many people, which is Learning Zen. Is Chick-fil-A a great sandwich company? They make a great sandwich that happens to believe in learning and development, or are they a learning and development company that happens to make a chicken sandwich? And I think the latter is true. I think that they have invested in learning and development, and they said, okay, we know in order for each unit to follow the system and deliver that same experience. And when you ask them a question and you say thank you, every single person in that store says my pleasure. You spill a frozen lemonade and some guy like literally like comes out of thin air and he's there cleaning the thing up before you've even gotten out of your booth. Like they just instill in all of their workers exactly how to do their job and what's expected of them. And that's a really, hard thing to do, because you've got to make that commitment to learning and development. We know most of the business challenges are something that can be trainable, but we've got to have that commitment to saying, okay, we'll build the materials to support them. And I think what kind of happens in a learning management system, which is kind of cool, is, your courses are in the system, and that means you have a ton of data that you can now analyze and track and hopefully turn this into executable action items. And so if you can take a look at your training and see that, hey, on the hourly employees, 70% of our community gets this question wrong. They're all failing it in our LMS. That's an identifier for you, the franchisor, to say, hey, we need to think about redesigning that course or reinvesting in that course, because we've identified an area everybody struggles. And we can do that the same way. We can analyze things by unit, or we can analyze things by staff member. So the same thing goes for the franchisee as well. If franchisees are all struggling with, let's say, marketing the LTOs that are coming out over the summer, and we're not getting traction on those areas, well, let's take a look back at the training. Did we properly train them to do that? Have they taken the training? Can we track whether they took that training? And so I think the commitment starts really there of saying, hey, you know what? We are a learning and development, company. We realize that if we're going to get better at every location, that starts with training. But I think what it starts with, Charles, is maybe us sort of backing up the bus a little bit and taking a look at some things before we start just going willy-nilly creating training materials. So I'm going to sort of outline a bit of a process here that I think a lot of people maybe don't consider when they're building out a training program, which is, you mentioned to me that, everybody's got an operations manual, and the operations manual is awesome. Everyone needs to have one, right? Because this is a collection of things that you really need to do as a franchisee to run your business. These are all of the operational things you're going to have to do. What those manuals don't have inside of them are how to do those things. And more importantly, why do we do these things? If I'm going to tell you, to make sure you've checked on allergies, I need to explain why it's so important that we don't serve somebody who's allergic to peanuts, like a Thai curry full of nuts. And so I think the operations manual is a great starting point to tell us, okay, now I need to say what in this operations manual needs to be explained to the franchisee. And then what is the franchisee going to need to create so that or at least have access to, so that they could assign to the hourly employees. So I think you're going to do a number of things. You're going to analyze what you've got for your learning assets, and that's your operations manuals, and that's any PDFs that you have, or images, or videos. Has your CEO, been on a video recording that you'd like to mix into your materials? Do that upfront analysis, and then you've got to do the analysis on your learners. How do they like to absorb training material? If you've got a young group who, go home from work and they spend 90 minutes on TikTok watching 60-second videos, I bet if you developed training materials that were video based and they could take them in 60 seconds to 2 minutes, that's going to be a really good experience for the hourly staff. It might be different, for the owners. The owners might be a different group of learners, where we have, maybe it's more women and they're in the 35, to 45 region. How do they like to absorb their training? And so I think it comes with doing a little bit of analysis up front. And then you're going to be listing out your training processes, and ask yourself on each thing that you're going to, teach someone, whether that came out of the operations manual or somewhere else. It's a really simple question. Is this training? If it's yes, then it's going to go into your LMS. And if it's no, It's going to go in your document repository that's searchable, that they can find the answer to something, but it's not truly training. And then, build a course matrix, right? Segment your courses out. You've got a group of courses for owners. You've got a group of courses for hourly staff. So now we've got these two different groups of categories of courses. And then what assets lend themselves to those courses? If I'm teaching you how to greet the customer, I'd love to see how the first store opened greeted the customers. And I'd love to pour that into every single store that opens after the fact, so that, I don't go into one store and they say, "Hey, what's up?" And I go into another store and they say, "Welcome to Charles's Bagel Bakery. What brought you in today?" There's a big difference in sort of those things, but unless we tell them how we want it, then we're not really trying to enforce our system at all locations. And then I think lastly, you've got this list of courses for owners, for hourly staff. I want you to rank those things. What's the most important right now? What's going to move that needle, right? Are sales down? Upselling and cross-selling rises to the top. Are we dealing with a lot of turnover? Well, maybe we need to think about how can we teach our franchisees how to hire right the first time. And so ranking those courses are going to tell us what's most important. Start building those most important courses from your two different matrix lists till you get to the end. I think that was a long-winded answer, Charles, but I love the question.
Doug, it's a great response. And I what a mindset shift. I didn't want to interrupt. I mean, your analogy with Chick-fil-A and really rethinking, are we a sandwich shop or we're, your phrase, learning and development company? That's very striking, right? Because it's one thing to have a manual or an LMS that instructs employees to respond with my pleasure versus having that and it being implemented all the time and becoming part of the culture, right? Everyone could have that in their manual or in their system, but why does one company execute on it and one doesn't? Or why, when you check into a Ritz-Carlton, they're handing you your room key by coming around the counter and the other things. What becomes that intangible? Because to me, you really struck me, even for our own business, because reflecting on our own, we're having, as we grow, I'm like, our LMS, our internal system should be, I won't say stronger, but I'd say more efficient, right? And then you worry, where does that lead from a cultural standpoint? When you're observing clients and companies that make that leap to a learning and development company, not just, what do you see culturally or team-wise, and how are they making that happen, that shift?
You're so spot on, right, with that comment about culture, because I think that's the ultimate goal. Is when we're talking about, franchising a system, we want the same feel at all of our locations, the same customer experience and the same quality. And that's because that's what our culture was when we built this brand. And I think what we're trying to do when we're creating a learning and development institution is incorporating our culture into our training materials. And you actually, without even knowing it, talked about one of my absolute favorite brands when it comes to culture, right? When we're talking about Ritz-Carlton, I have a quick little story. I hope I can share it, but I'll try not to make it too long. But Ritz-Carlton is a company that I have a very sort of emotional connection to, because I was down at a conference in New Orleans about 10 years ago. And we had I was there with my colleague. We'd gone out and saw a concert on Bourbon Street, and we were staying at the Ritz-Carlton. We never stay at the Ritz-Carlton, for the record. Like, this was a random, like, I can't believe we're staying at the Ritz-Carlton thing. But it was awesome. So they check us in. We go out and we see this concert, right? Oh, I take this back. Back this story up a second. There's not enough room at the Ritz-Carlton the first night. So I'm actually staying at the Intercontinental, which was close by to the Ritz-Carlton in New Orleans. Go out to dinner, having a great time, had a few drinks, go back to the hotel. I realize all the water we bought to have at our booth to hand out to people is in my colleague's room, who's fast asleep, and I'm not going to go wake them up. So I've got $6 in my pocket. I walk across to the corner store. I wake up in an emergency room in New Orleans. I got mugged in New Orleans where somebody hit me on the back of the head with, I don't know what. I'm completely passed out. I come to for a few seconds and there's someone taking care of me. It happens to be an Air Force medic and he's just making sure I'm okay. Get me to the hospital. I've got no wallet. I've got $6 still in my pocket. So I didn't get mugged for money. I got mugged for who knows what the reason is. I'm a John Doe because I've got no wallet, right? And so what happens is when I come to, I can remember the phone number, call my wife at home, who calls my colleague and starts reaching out. And next thing I know, my colleague is at the hospital. At that point, it's the next day. I have to check out of the Intercontinental into the Ritz. I show up in the Ritz-Carlton and I looked like I took, Mike Tyson on for, 2 rounds. I've got a fractured jaw. I've got my eye kind of hanging out of my socket. I'm black and blue. I look like it's awful, right? It's the thing. Basically, everybody's staring at me. The Ritz-Carlton checks me in. They assign me a staff member, and the staff member has a pager on, and he walks me up to my room. He takes my prescription for painkillers and anti-nausea and other things. He goes and fills my prescriptions for me. He comes back with a smoothie because I can't open my jaw. All I can do is suck something through a straw. He shows me the menu for dinner and he says, which one of these things do you like? And I was like, I can't eat anyway. He's like, tell me which one you want. I tell him. He turns what's dinner into a soup. Like they blend the entire dinner down into a soup and bring it up to me. He checks on me every 3 hours. This guy's never met me before. I've never stayed at a Ritz-Carlton. It's just the most incredible. Oh, and I forgot I'm leaving. They're like, hey, we know you didn't have time to bring something back to your daughter. They realize I've got a 7-year-old daughter at home, and they make up a gift basket with a teddy bear and a little spa robe and like a book and something else that I could bring back to her. Now, how much did that impact me for the rest of my, I'm going to tell this story for the rest of my life, right? Because Ritz-Carlton gets culture. All of their employees have their mantra sewn into the inside sleeve of their shirts. Every single employee at Ritz-Carlton has the power to comp a room to anyone there or comp an upgrade. And it's because they created this culture of excellence around this company, and they are a learning and development company that resonates that culture through every staff member, whether you're on the custodial janitorial side, whether you're doing housekeeping, working at the restaurant, or checking you in. And so culture is the most important thing. It's why people bought into your brand to begin with. They bought into your culture and what you were delivering with that experience. And so if you want to get your culture into your units, you got to get in front of that camera and you got to take pictures of your location. You got to talk about why it matters that we greet the customers this way. Why are we trying to pair food with this particular drink? Explain that why to them. And then that culture is going to spread across every single unit. And next thing you know, your brand at all locations makes you proud every time you visit it. But you got to make that investment into culture, and you got to put that in your training. Sorry, that was a
No. Well, think about, right, the power. I mean, from a cultural standpoint, you had a powerful story. I bring it up, right, because there's something special happening there for everyone listening or watching this, right? So there'll be some franchisors out there that they know that they need to build up their LMS systems, and for sure they should be reaching out, Doug. But what are some signs between, and this is something I always worry about, right? I believe we have an amazing culture.
Yeah.
But then I question myself. I'm like, does everyone believe that? And certainly not everyone does. And the ones that don't, what are they missing, right? I'm fascinated when I drive by a restaurant. I feel bad. There's one thriving and one that's not. And what's the story that the one that's not thriving saying why, right? They're not blaming themselves. So what are some objective warning signs or positive signs when it comes to training LMS beyond the actual task of doing? But what are things you would look at between, we both have LMS systems, but that one gets it a little more, and what's happening different there?
Yeah. I think what's happening different there are a couple of different things. And I think there are some signs, right? And I would say that I'm going to say something controversial, but I will say that, when I really started in franchising 15 years ago, I would talk to franchise brands, and the disdain that some franchise brands had for their franchisees was nauseating, right? Like it's like, they're all idiots and they're not going to listen to me anyways, right? And then you've got the other side of thing, which is the franchisees are like, the guys at corporate are assholes. They're not building us anything. Like they're not supporting us. So I think if you have a disconnect, and I think that there's some animosity, friction is okay, right? Friction is good. It's healthy. You work through it. But I think if there's something beyond that where there's animosity, I think that's a sign that you've got a real culture problem. And that's something that needs to change, because at the end of the day, you and I both know if we can focus on the unit level economics of each location and everyone is performing well at the location level, hey, me as a franchisor, I'm doing well. I'm collecting royalties on units that are performing really well. But if I have this, acrimonious relationship between franchisee and franchisor where there's not respect for each other anymore, I think that's the poison pill of a franchise brand in my mind. And I think you got to find a way to truly get the message out that, hey, we at corporate, we really care about your units. And that's why we're investing in a training platform, because we want to be able to empower you to be as successful as the first unit we ever opened was. But it also allows us to see what are the indicators of what's not performing well, maybe at your location. And so if we have the ability to cross-reference training records with profitability numbers, I think that's going to tell us some really interesting things. I think some of the other just really obvious ones are, if you're dealing with a ton of turnover, if you're constantly running through people, I think that's a warning sign for all of us. I think that's a sign to say, hey, our employees don't feel invested, respected, that we support them, that we're kind of trying to help them grow as human beings and as employees. And I think that's an area where we could invest in some things that might help their skill sets. Maybe they don't even necessarily help with the franchise brand, but you help with them personally, or the courses that we create, some soft skills courses that might help them.
In this, during our conversation before we started, first and foremost, like my big takeaway, which is something that I really have to think about too, as we get into our next quarterly meeting. And we have an amazing team, although an amazing culture, but this past quarter, I realized I may have some blind spots, and not team's amazing. It just blind spots on me needing to do more. But what I also appreciated was you're connecting the dots between a Learning Zen and profitability at the franchisee level on the turnover. I could share. This was interesting when we were discussing, and I think this is we were discussing, you were talking about employee turnover. It was, what I loved is you were a little obsessed with it, but I think for a really good reason, which is, hey, we're not just talking about training here, but we're also talking about dollars, and we're talking about a multiplier effect when you're talking about franchisees. So like, if you just share a little what your mindset was, because I think it demonstrates another reason why it's imperative financially that we get these systems down.
Yeah, it actually stemmed from having conversations with you, having conversations with Nick, as well as just going to industry events over the past couple of years. There does seem to be a healthy shift in franchising where we're not necessarily talking about the disconnect between owners and franchisees. We're actually trying to, build them up a little bit and empower them. And what the overarching theme, I would say, over the last couple of years in particular, was somebody talking about unit level profitability. And so I kept thinking about the fact that, if we're focused on unit level economics, how much is turnover, killing these individual small business owners as well as an entire franchisor ecosystem? And so I actually took this one upon myself. Usually all credit goes to my team. They are absolutely amazing. This is one that I had a little bee in my bonnet about. And I was just like, how do I determine what turnover costs truly are, especially in franchising, knowing that we're dealing with, hourly employees and not salaried employees. And so I did some research, and I pulled from a couple of articles that are linked on our page from G&A Partners, HuffPost, and People Keep, just kind of looking at, well, how much does it cost every time we lose an employee to, do the posting for them, do the interviews, go through the candidate selection, and then we hire them, and then we onboard them, and we train them, and 2 weeks later they've left. How much is that impacting my business? And so we came up with a formula that would track that, especially for hourly companies, because we work, in the franchising world. We wanted to know how that's going to affect them. And so I kind of took some sort of modest numbers here, but I'll just say, if we're dealing with a fast casual restaurant, in general, fast casual space, especially for restaurants, many of them are dealing with almost 100% turnover rate, which is, you hear it and you're like, well, that's staggering, but it's not. It's not that much different in other, hourly employee businesses as well. But if we were to kind of use this little calculator that I built, I can just come in here and type in some figures. So everybody can do this for their own brand. And if today you've got a fast casual, let's say Mexican-American restaurant, 25 employees, you're paying an hourly rate of $15, and you've got 100 locations, but you're also dealing with 100% turnover, how much does that hurt your brand overall? And it's staggering. Before we see the numbers, I'll say that it's going to be a wild number. It's going to hurt your eyes. Click turnover costs. And what we see is the annual cost per unit who has 25 employees and 100% turnover is they're spending $225,000 a year in hiring, rehiring, training, and educating. As a brand, $22.5 million is being spent. So when we add up all of those locations, if each of those 100 locations is dealing with that, that's close to $2.5 million. I mean, $22.5 million, right? Staggering number. But a lot of times it's because, employees don't feel like they've been invested in. They don't know what's expected of them with their job, or maybe how they're being measured. When we say, clean the front, make sure you clean the door on the way in, are they wiping down the handle, or are we teaching them to actually spray the glass and wipe in a circular motion, start at the top and go all the way down from the bottom? So when they see the sense of sort of accomplishment at the end, they know they've done that job correctly. And they know in the end that that's, sort of what's expected of them. I'm much more likely to stay. And I've done this myself in my days working in a pizza restaurant. But if we could take that number and say, you know what? We have invested in our employees. They are happier. They're staying longer. They know what's expected of them. And I drop that down to 80%. You go from it being 225 per unit to 180 grand per unit. So at the unit level, when you're starting out and you're in your first couple of years, $45,000 extra in your pocket is a massive amount of money for you, right? And as a brand, if they're saving almost $4.5 million as a brand, how much more does that come back in royalties? So that upfront investment in learning and development, creating this culture of learning and embedding the culture of your people at the home office into the training materials, but letting your franchisees be the one who assign those courses. We've stayed in compliance. Everyone is trained. We're following the system, and we can track that we're following the system and then start measuring things according to, hey, what does our profit and loss show us against the training records, and identify areas where we need to maybe build more training courses because we're a little bit light in one area. So thanks for letting me show this, by the way. I love this tool.
No, Doug, what I love about it is it's connecting the dots, from the intangible to tangible dollars, and even beyond the turnover costs that I love that you're demonstrating on that webpage. I mean, you also have other hard costs, which are customer satisfaction, customer retention, and back to the Ritz-Carlton example or the Chick-fil-A, and that gets to scalability, which I feel great about the conversation. I just feel like I need to work on my own systems. But
I feel the same way about mine, though. But,
yeah.
but I think about yours, and I my problem is that I have like this sort of undiagnosed ADHD and my brain moves faster than I can even get things out. Right. And so as I'm, heard you talking a little bit about customer satisfaction. I don't know about you, but I'm a type of guy who, when I go out to dinner or go to an event or use a service, I'm really likely to leave a review for one or two things: an amazing experience and a really crappy experience. But if I'm getting average service, I'm not rating that. I'm not leaving right. And so if I can, find a way that everybody walks out of my restaurant and was like, whoa, that was really nice. Like that waiter was really well trained, and like they, described that meal without, even sort of reading off of their list. And gosh, this guy paired like the most amazing wine with my dinner. I'm like, I'm taking pictures of that and I'm posting that all day, right? If I have a horrible experience, I might post it. Anything that's just meh, I'm probably just not going to report about it. Or I might leave a review where it's got a number of stars, but I don't type any notes, so it has no value to anybody over that kind of thing. So, but to circle it back to, you feeling like, maybe you're not doing enough. I think that's what we're always feeling, right? When we're sort of running these teams, it's really hard to kind of get out of that notion. But Charles, are all of your teams sort of in one location, or are they dispersed all over the place?
We, I'd say 95% of our team is one location, and that's been critical for us.
So when I think of that, you have don't beat yourself up too much about, what you're doing with your LMS, because if you're using your LMS to train your clients, that's one thing. But if you're using it to train your team, you're with them a lot of the time, right? And I think of an LMS as really lending itself to multi-location businesses, certainly franchising, but when you can't be at all places at the same time, your likeness can be. You can have great conversations with your team almost every day. So I think you're actually probably in a better spot than you think you are, because you don't have the dispersion.
Right. No, I will use that to comfort me, but
Yeah.
Definitely a quarterly goal for us is I'm going to improve our LMS systems internally. And Doug, again, you've changed my mindset on, and I love your focus on, a learning and development company. I also love that our clients, LearningZen's an amazing company and product. And so we'll have information certainly on this with this video. But Doug, if anyone wants to find out more about LearningZen, who are they reaching out to? They'll reach out to you or team members there?
Yeah, I would say that typically they're going to reach out to me, just dougm@learningzen.com. My wife, Cassandra, is the most knowledgeable person on the system. So Cassandra s@learningzen.com as well. We are on, you can go to our website, learningzen.com. We are on LinkedIn. We're sort of trying to be a little bit everywhere. But I really appreciate you having me on, Charles, and getting to talk about something that's a real passion piece for me. Like I said, I love doing these interviews, but I rarely get to kind of geek out about something that I love to geek out about. And I will tell you that we're a little bit different in the space. We're kind of like a boutique agency, Learning Zen. We've got an amazing team. My job is so easy because my team is incredible. My development team, my support team. Learning Zen, actually, we do something kind of unique. When we bring on a new client, we actually introduce you to our team and we assign you a customer care agent. You have access to our support team, and we support not you, the franchisor. We also support all of your units. So if a franchisee has a problem, they don't remember how to create a user, they don't call you, the franchisor, and put more on your plate. They call us, and we love the phone. We're not a submit a ticket and we'll get back to you in 48 hours. We're a call us so we can solve your problem and you can get back to work and move on with your life. And so it's something I'm obviously extremely proud of the team and what we built. I love this franchising space. I feel like we are really making an impact, getting to help these businesses grow. And so thanks for having me on, man. I adore you, Charles.
Yeah, Doug, you can't fake the passion. So I appreciate it, man. And I know the franchisors out there too. So Doug, thanks so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Cheers.